Okay, this is day 6 notes, rational zeros and the fundamental theorem of algebra. So, first of all, we know that polynomials with degree n have n solutions. So that means if my highest degree is 2, if I have x squared, I'm going to have 2 solutions. If my highest degree is 6, x to the 6, I'm going to have 6 solutions. Now, these are not all real solutions. They can be a combination of real and imaginary. The imaginary ones have to come in groups of 2. So if I have 4 real solutions, I could have 2 imaginary ones, but I'm never going to have 1 imaginary or 3 imaginary. The imaginary ones have to come in groups of 2. Now, to find possible rational roots, you take the factors of the constant divided by factors of the leading coefficient. So on this first one, I have my constants 12. So my factors of 12, plus and minus 1, plus and minus 2, plus and minus 3, plus and minus 4, plus and minus 6, and plus and minus 12. My factors of my leading coefficient are plus and minus 1, plus and minus 2. So then to find my possible roots, I divide. So the first ones, when I divide by 1, they don't change. I just have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 12. When I divide by 2, I get 1/2 for the first one. The second one gives me 2 over 2, which is 1, and I've already written 1, so I don't need to write it again. 3 over 2, and then I have already written 4 over 2, that's 2. 6 over 2 is 3, and 12 over 2 is 6. So these are all my possibilities. Now realize I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 16 possibilities, but I know I'm only going to have 4 solutions. So these are possibilities. These do not mean that these are all my solutions. And they're only the rational possibilities. These aren't my imaginary possibilities, definitely. So the same thing down here. These numbers here come from my factors of 20. So these are all the factors of 20. These on the bottom are the factors of 3. When I divide them, I divide first by 1, and I just rewrite all the numbers. And then when I divide them by 3, 1 over 3, 2 over 3, 4 over 3, 5 over 3, 10 over 3, 20 over 3. So these are my possibilities. Again, these are not my answers, or my possibilities for my rational roots. Now, if I want to test my possibilities and see are they actual zeros, I use synthetic division and I look to see is the remainder a 0. So if I want to know is x equals 2 a solution, I'm going to divide by 2. So I check before I go through and make sure I have all of my terms. So I have x to the third, x squared, x, and my constant, so I don't need to add a 0 in. And then drop the first, and I do my synthetic division. And I see that my remainder is 0. So yes, this one is a solution because my remainder is 0. Now it wants to know the factored form. So I started with x to the third. That means that this is x squared. So I have x squared, this is my 0, or my, it's a 0 coefficient of x, so I don't need to write that, and this is my constant. So x squared minus 9. I could either solve this with the square root method, or I can factor it. This is difference of squares, so very easy to factor, x plus 3, x minus 3. So my factored form is this 0 from up here. Don't forget about this one. You've got to turn that into a factor by adding x and switching the sign, and then these are my other 2 factors. And to get my zeros, well, I already have that one up there, which is 2. These zeros are set them equal to 0 and solve. So my 3 zeros are negative 3, 3, and 2. And I'm supposed to have 3 because it's x cubed, so I don't have any imaginary ones on this one. I have my 3 real solutions. Okay, so let's say I am not given anything and I'm given this and I decide to graph it, and this is what I get as a graph. Well, it's x to the third, so I'm supposed to have 3 solutions, but I only see 1 on the graph. So that means I have to have 2 imaginary solutions. So I start with my real one. I'm going to do synthetic division. So this right here is at x equals negative 5, so my negative 5 goes out here. I check and make sure I have everything, 3, 2, 1, 0, yep. So I do synthetic division and I get a remainder of 0. Now, in this case, if you don't get a remainder of 0, you made a mistake because you know that this is a 0. You can see that it is a 0. And then once I get this, I started with x to the third. That means I go down 1. So this is the coefficient of x squared, this is the coefficient of x, and this is the constant. So I can write x squared plus 3 equals 0. This is, I can't factor it, but it's very easy to do square root method on. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides and then take the square root of both sides. That gives me x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 3. I can't simplify 3 at all. I can't make any pairs, but that negative goes to the outside as an I. So I have plus or minus I times the square root of 3. So my 3 answers are the one from the graph, negative 5, positive I times the square root of 3, and negative I times the square root of 3. Those are my 3 answers for that one. Same thing with this next one. If I graph it and I see this, it's x to the 4th. So I know I'm supposed to have 4 solutions, but I only see 2 on the graph. So I know solutions. So on the graph, this crosses at negative 3 and 3. It doesn't matter which one I start with for synthetic. I can start with either one. I'm going to end up using both of them. So I've got x to the 4th, but I'm missing x to the 3rd. I've got x squared, I'm missing x, and then I have my constant. So I'm going to start with negative 3, and I do my synthetic, I get 0, which if I don't get 0, I made a mistake. Again, because we know it's a 0. Now, I wrote this out here, but you actually don't need to write it out. You can just keep doing synthetic without writing that. It would look like this. I can keep doing synthetic without writing it out in polynomial form again. So I got my answer, and now I'm going to use my other 0 from the graph. So here I just wrote it out so you could see what it looked like. So I keep doing it with my second one. I did negative 3, and now I'm using 3. And I get this. So this is my remainder, this is my constant, this is my x, so this means this is x squared. So this is x squared plus 4. When I set it equal to 0 and solve, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides and then take the square root of both sides. So when I take the square root of both sides, this is plus or minus, by the way, the square root of 4 is 2, and that negative makes it I, so I have plus or minus 2I. So my 4 zeros are the ones on the graph, negative 3 and 3, and then positive 2I and negative 2I. Those are my 4 zeros. All right, lastly, writing a polynomial of least degree with real coefficient of 1 and negative 2, 3, and 4 as zeros. Got to get really good at adding an x and switching the sign. So to go from zeros to factors, add an x, switch the sign. Add an x, switch the sign. Add an x, switch the sign. Now, it did not ask for this in factored form. So you're going to have, so in this case, I multiplied the first 2 first, x plus 2, x minus 3. Remember that these are like terms. And I got x squared minus x minus 6, and then I still have to multiply it by x minus 4. So now I'm drawing a 2 by 3 box. Again, those are like terms. And I get this answer down here. Now again, this is a video, so please pause it as you go through. I'm going through this really fast. Pause it, go back and watch parts again that you don't understand. You shouldn't just be watching this through. You're not going to have time to go through and write everything at the speed that I'm going through this video. So I expect you to be pausing and going back as you watch this. All right, last one, same thing, write a polynomial. I'm given the zeros. So I'm going to add an x, switch the sign. Add an x, switch the sign. Add an x, switch the sign. Now it does matter which 2 you multiply first here. You need to multiply these 2 because they are my complex answers. Now, when I do that, these 2 are like terms, but they also cancel out. 2ix minus 2ix is 0. And down here, negative 4i squared is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 4 is positive 4. So this gives me x squared plus 4. And then I multiply x squared plus 4 times x minus 1, and I get this. Now, the other way to get my factors from my imaginary zeros is think about it as if I had x equals 1 and I want to turn that into a factor, I would subtract 1 from both sides and get x minus 1 equals 0. If I have x equals plus or minus 2i, I could square both sides. That gives me x squared. Well, 2 times 2 is 4, and I squared is negative 1. So 2i squared is negative 4. And then I would say, okay, I'm going to add 4 to both sides, x squared plus 4 equals 0. So that's maybe a harder way to think about it, but a quicker way if it makes sense. Or you can just do it this way by adding an x and switching the signs. So again, I'm sorry I'm not here today. Please go back and watch this a few times, or watch the parts you need, pause it. And I will be here in the morning at 7:30 if you have any questions and want to come for some help.